Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again for your patience. We're going to start with our next panel discussion straight away. Again, we've got three very accomplished speakers, and this panel discussion is on analyzing the trends and implications of the 2018 general elections. Okay, so we've got three speakers. Roshika Deo, who's a feminist and activist, and she's the founder of Be the Change movement. We've also got Zephaniah Sakai from the University of the South Pacific, and finally Lucretia Hussain, who's the CEO of the Citizens Constitutional Forum. For this session, the first speaker is Roshika Deo.
Good afternoon, everyone. So for my presentation today, I will focus on doing a broad comparison of the 2014 and the 2018 elections, including a very short analysis of the 2018 party manifestos, because this will help provide some nuance to the implication discussions that I'm going to have towards the end of my presentation. So to begin with, it has already been mentioned in previous presentations, but I do want to highlight certain aspects of it. So as you can see, in the 2014 election and the 2018 election, so the number of seats that were gained and the number of votes that was acquired. It has been highlighted, but I do want to put it in numbers for more emphasis. If you note in the others section, which included smaller political parties, parties that did not get into parliament, and also included independents for the 2014 election, there was a higher number of votes that was accumulated there. Now in 2018 election, it has drastically reduced. So from 7.21% that other smaller parties and independents garnered, to 2018, it was only 2.76%. One other thing that I want to highlight, that in 2014 election, there were 7 political parties. There were 7 political parties that stood for elections and 2 independents. And in 2018, there were only 6 political parties. So there were also a lot more people in 2014 compared to 2018. And 2 of the smaller political parties that were registered and stood for elections in 2014 became, they stopped operating, they became dormant. I think one of them got struck off the registrar, and then there was PDP. So those 2 parties don't even exist anymore. So they have become absolved in different ways. For the 2018 election, there were 2 new parties. So Hope and Unity. So there were the 2 new parties that came within the political fabric during 2018. The other thing around the votes acquired, I do want to highlight, is that for the Northern, Central, and Eastern Division, SODELPA and Fiji First, including NFP, they all had nearly similar votes that they acquired. The largest difference was in the Western Division, with Fiji First getting around 60% and SODELPA getting around 20% of the vote. With the number of seats, this has already been mentioned, but just to again highlight, so you can see how the seats reduced. So as has been said, there were 51 seats for 2018 election that was stated within the laws that because of the increase in the population, an extra seat will be allocated. So there was an extra seat allocated in Parliament. So there were 51 seats. So Fiji First actually lost seats. They didn't gain any seats. SODELPA, on the other hand, not only gained the seats that Fiji First lost, but they also gained the additional seat that was mandated for under the law within the 2018 election. You cannot talk about democracy and elections without talking about women in politics. So elections are a small part of democracy. Having representative democracy, having active participation of women, young women, youths, people of the LGBTIQ community, people with disability, these are all part of the democratization process. And we cannot be a genuine and a true democracy if it is not reflective of the society and the culture that we live in. So this was also very interesting. Again, I think Father Arms also mentioned a little bit of this. In the 2014 elections, you can see the number of women that stood for elections has increased. The women elected has also increased, but the votes for women has reduced by half, nearly. So women gained more votes in the 2014 elections than they did in the 2018 election. So the people that voted for women, so the number of votes that were given to women, were so much more less in the 2018 election. And this is where this trend also begs us to ask some hard questions. We've had a lot of civil society organizations that have been mobilized and has put in quite a lot of resources into increasing women's political participation. And at the same time, to also transform, a lot of the culture around voter education and so forth. But what is the impact of that? Is that resulting in more women getting votes? And what are the impacts of it if it is not? And how are these programs or initiatives that CSOs undertake being evaluated? In this analysis, I also want to mention another thing that is really key in terms of the difference between 2014 and 2018 is how women lost out leadership roles within political parties. So in 2014, there were more women that were at the helm of political party leadership. And in 2018, that drastically reduced. So in 2018, we only had Fiji Labour Party, that had a female, Lavenia Padharat, as the president. Hope's party's leader was a woman, Tupou, and then you had Unity, Andi Sylvia Goro, who was the president. Apart from that, there was no any president, and at the leadership level, there was no other political parties. So the two main ones that are in parliament, including NFP, they didn't have any women at the leadership helm. And as mentioned earlier, the other intersectionalities that is important to look at when we are looking at women in politics or representative democracy is who are being represented and who are not being represented. Who do we see in parliament? Is it a reflective of our society? Are the issues being raised in parliament a reflection of our society? Are there pluralistic ideals that are being promoted or not? Moving along, so what about the voters? So in 2014, that's how many registered voters we had, and in 2018, that's the number of registered voters we had. Now looking at the voter turnout. So in 2014, we had 84.6, and in 2018, 71.9%. I know Sanim has touched a bit on it, so I won't dwell too much on it, but I do want us to also talk about what does this mean in terms of voter awareness. Has restrictive provisions in the electoral decree prevented civil society organizations from mobilizing more effectively and efficiently in carrying out civic and voter awareness? And why has the voter turnout decreased? Was it only because of the weather? So these are some of the things that we really need to question and look at a little bit more deeply in terms of the trends in the two elections. The manifesto analysis. So I have provided a very brief analysis of some of the issues that some of them are very dear to me, and some issues have been quite polarizing for the big parties and are tied with other rights, such as environmental rights, indigenous rights, and to be free from torture and brutality by security forces. So in the 2018 elections, in terms of LGBTIQ rights, none of the political parties had anything on it in their party manifesto. It is one thing if candidates are talking about it, but in order for there to be political will and accountability, it needs to be in the party manifesto. In women's rights, we didn't have Unity and SADELPA, anything around either violence against women, women's economic empowerment, anything around women's rights. Seabed mining, did any of the, and this is and not only seabed mining, but the extractive resource industry. There's a lot of discussions right now about mining, not only in Fiji, but within the region and around the world. And because there's more science and data around showing the implications of extractive resource industry on the people, the land, the culture, and so forth. But none of the political parties had anything around it except for SODELPA, who actually mentioned it in a positive way. They actually encouraged, they said they will look into seabed mining, They will look into seabed mining and other mineral resources because they have a lot of economic potential. So none of the political parties mention it in an active form except for SODELPA, who have it in an affirmative form. People with disability, Unity didn't have anything on it, whereas every other party had something around it. Animal rights, NFP was the only political party that did. Now, in terms of reconciliation, truth, and justice, all of us present in this room talking about social cohesion do know that we don't really have genuine and true social cohesion within our communities. There's a lot of ethnic tensions, there's a lot of friction and so forth. So what are the political parties doing? And they all are fully aware of it. So except for Unity, FLP, and Hope, none of the political parties had anything broad around reconciliation, truth, and justice. SODELPA did, but they conveniently left out the 1987 coup. So they mentioned specifically 2000, 2006, but they don't put 1987, and we all know why. And then West Papua. The only political party that had anything on West Papua was NFP. In terms of security forces brutality and torture, given that we've had so many deaths straight after the 2006 coup and continuously in police custody, in security forces custody, which is a big issue, and in terms of torture and brutality, Fiji Labour Party was the only party that had anything in their manifesto around it. And these are some of the things that I wanted to highlight because it helps give nuance to some of the discussions that I'm very quickly going to go through under the implications category. Please bear with me for a couple more minutes.
2 more minutes.
Okay, so some of the implications, and I'm going to speak a little bit fast. I'm really sorry, so hopefully there'll be opportunities during question and answers for me to go a bit more deeply into some of these issues. So establishment politics, which essentially means that there's a group of elite people retaining power among themselves, people who serve their own interests and belong to a similar social and cultural grouping. Example, in the US, it is rich white old men. In Fiji, it is military men or just generally older men who have established an establishment of politics. We are not at the stage where I say that there's nothing can be done. I think we can still intervene and we can still shape this, but there is already a lot of establishment established around military in Fiji. And it has infiltrated into a lot of civilian spaces. The two-party democracy has been talked about already. So here we have SODELPA and Fiji First. Smaller parties are becoming defunct. They're getting lesser votes. This is a dangerous trend. We need robust and dynamic discussions and debates around issues. We need proportional representation of the diversity that is present in our country and that makes us what we are. And with a two-party system, it's not possible at all. And we need to move away from a two-party system. So right now we have SODELPA, that is an Itoke-based political party, and then we have Fiji First that is supported majority by Indo-Fijians. So we talk a lot about moving from, ethnic politics, but in a way we are still reinforcing elements of ethnic politics, even with this two-party-based system. And I do want to say that social media is heavily influencing this trend through the use of fear, divisive politics, and the narrative around wasted votes. Militarism, so what does this mean? It means a growing role of military in national affairs, use of force, hostility, and authoritarianism as an instrument of prevalence and political power. It is an extension, in Fiji we see the military influence extending to a lot of civilian space, including the economic and the socio-political lives. We see glorification of the power of the military and its establishment. And there is a stress on hierarchy and discipline, which is detriment to democracy because it doesn't encourage all of us to ask questions. It doesn't encourage us to hold leaders accountable. And these are some of the issues that is present with militarism. Right now in Parliament, the three parties that are there all have military coup perpetrators at the helm of the leadership. So we have Pio Tikondewa as the president of NFP, Rambuka and Bainimarama as the leaders of SODELPA and Fiji First, respectively. So what does this say about our political leadership, the ethos and the operation of the political parties? How is it influenced? How military coup perpetrators continue escaping all forms of accountability for taking over government? Is this the precedent we are setting within our political systems? The next one that I want to very quickly highlight, ethno-nationalism, 2 minutes. Ethno-nationalism and authoritarianism. I feel that sometimes we're stuck between a rock and a hard place with SODELPA and Fiji First. So we have an ethno-nationalist party, and then we have an authoritarian military party. Where do we go? And I think that, it's a given. There is evidence, there is research, there is stats that indigenous rights are deteriorating in Fiji. That there is more effort, more laws and policies are needed in order to protect and promote indigenous rights. But there's also a lot of confusion and lack of understanding that prevails around this among other ethnic groups. And this is creating a lot of opportunities for political parties to use to gain power. There's also issues around that, group rights are not superior and that it doesn't come at the expense or at the oppression of other ethnic rights. Whereas SODELPA and Fiji First both peddle this narrative. They peddle in different ways, but they both peddle this narrative to the advantage to create fear and insecurity to gain political power.
2 minutes is up.
Yep. And finally, I know there's going to be discussions tomorrow morning. I just want to talk a little bit, just 1 minute, on insecurity, hate speech, and Islamophobia. And this is a new trend that has become more violently visible than it ever was. The rise of Islamophobia in Fiji. This could be also influenced by global politics in places like the US, India, and closer to home, like New Zealand and Australia, but also in terms of how the three political parties in Parliament are taking responsibility and what are they doing to curtail this. So with that, I'm going to end. I did have a few other things to speak about. Hopefully during question and answers, we'll have some opportunities. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay, thank you, Roshika, for your very frank views based on research. And that was a really good presentation. I now call upon my USP colleague, Zephaniah Sakai, who's with the School of Governance. Come on in.
All right, thank you. I'm going to share some views about the impact or the contribution of native land issues in the 2018 general election. I think the notion of the land issues is always there in Fiji since independence, even 1966, 1972, and so forth. And its contribution to social cohesion is most of the time not really, as I said, it's not really good for the nation. From the outset, I must say that land issue is often hijacked by political parties as the last resort, especially the Itauke political parties, to be used for their own advantage and mileage. Therefore, land issues often fail to achieve social cohesion in Fiji since independence. Let me just give you a recent dissertation on native land issues. The late Kenneth Chambers, who passed on last week, in his dissertation, he had mentioned that to help cushion the insecurity for Itaukei landowners, he recommended that portion of the land must be converted to freehold status. When I say freehold status, the ownership rights and usage rights lies with the land owning unit. And with that, to help in finance and so forth, then form a partnership with foreign investors or local investors to set up business so that landowners know the full strength and advantage about land usage, about their land. Right? The notion about native land is often regarded by many scholars, researchers, as detrimental, an obstacle to their development. Likewise, Matthew Dodd of Otago University, in his dissertation about, he analyzed the Land Use Act. One of the significant contributions to this, it says the Land Use Act that was introduced in 2010, weakens Itaukei control of their land not conducive to sustaining indigenous livelihoods. A provision take away the right of Itaukei to seek redress in the court of law. Again, this one, it doesn't contribute to social cohesion, especially in a multiracial society where indigenous people is a dominant culture. Ponipate, 2017, he critiqued and more criticized the colonial orchestrated policy institutions such as TLTB, which dispossess Itaukei their land rights and livelihoods. That, if you see that map, it shows you a clear pictures about land ownership. Land that is owned by Itaukei is native land in yellow, and the other, the freehold land in red. Most of this land convention took place before in 1870, 1865, 1880. And these are some of the most luxury, you can say, the luxury part of the land in Fiji. And the rest is native land. Often the official code now is 91%, but there is a lot of misinterpretation, conception about this 91% ownership. Okay, native land issues and the election outcomes since independence. I just gave you a snapshot about land issues since independence. In 1966 and 1960 election debate centered around government machinery and the electoral system. In fact, one point I want to highlight is that NFP is the most consistent pro-Itaukei land policy party in the history of Fiji. You may ask, and what about the Itaukei parties? One of the things about the Itaukei parties is the Alliance, SVT, SDL. They keep this colonial orchestrated policy because it benefits more the elites at the time, the chiefs. And to change these land policies under the Native Land Act, Native Land Trust Act, and so forth is like to stir instability within the Itaukei society, and so does party support during national election. Even J. Ram Reddy, NFP leader, proposed a win-and-win list, alter list arrangement with the government to act as a buffer landlord. Itaukei political parties maintain the colonial orchestrated land policy, contribute to coups when Itaukei political parties lost the election 1987, 2000, and 2006, question mark. Land is a connection to the Bonua, the normal rhetoric when people argue about land and political power in Fiji, leadership and so forth. If you can see even the Spade report of 1979 had already forewarned that the land race debate would create a gloomy political movement in Fiji, which is true. What is happening right now in Fiji has been highlighted, has been forewarned by people who did research about the Itoke system in Fiji. Ward in 1994 warns that the danger of Itoke increasing landlessness as more native land would deny Itoke rights to access and usage and so forth. The 2010 land reform after this colonial occupation, the test that came was in 2010 when the Bainimarama government took power. They introduced one main important act, which is the Land Use Act, and the amendment in the lease distribution or the nuclear distribution policy. Native Land Act amendments as well, implementing new acts, have been the taboo in Fiji's national administration since 1970. I already said the reason. Ratu Sekuna had warned Itoke long before Fiji gained independence to use their land, or else it will be used by others to generate national income and foreign exchange. So this is what we are facing now. And actually what Bainimarama did for the reform had already been introduced back, has been forewarned by Ratu Sekuna. And I want to put the fact that the Land Use Commission was actually introduced by Mahendra Chaudhry. And then Bainimarama introduced it again without hesitation, without any opposition. Again, it goes back to ethnicity and so forth. The equal distribution policy, as you know, that for the first time in 2010, first implemented in 2014, that all lease money are equally distributed amongst the Itoke landowners. I just want to give you this diagram this image to show you the impact of all distribution policy. All right, the TLTB, this is the first 25%, the rest of the Matangali 45%, the chief usually get 5%, head of the Busa 10%, head of the Matangali 10%. If 760,000 is the lease money, that's the allocation given to each Matangali member. So the three-level chiefs usually get more. Under the equal distribution policy, now from that 760,000, if there are 300 members, 2,280 will receive each member. The Matangali, out of that, the Matangali 90% with 684, each member will receive 2,280. TLTB will have 76,000, right? It's 10%. So most likely, many Itoke landowners will go with this policy. And this is one of the things that I often say to my friends. Bainimarama had done the most difficult job in terms of changing land policies, even though not without consultation, but it's there. So political leaders, especially when they come into power, this makes things easier for them. Okay, let me go very quickly to some of, sorry, my brother. Right, that's the general, I think that we've, the total election for each party on the central, Fiji Fest, SODELPA gained a lot of votes in all other divisions except the Western Division, although these are not a big margin. But the West gave Fiji Fest their second term in Parliament, where SODELPA just get 20.68% of the vote compared to Fiji Fest 91,992. And the West, in terms of land issues, this is where most of the tourism leases, agriculture leases, and you may ask, okay, the vote towards Fiji Fest, not SODALPA. So it's like more, contradictory in a sense that we expect more Itaukei landowners because of this perception about Bainimarama's government as anti-Itaukei, but still most votes went to Fiji Fest. By party leaders, Rambuka and Bainimarama and Biman, if you see Rambuka's vote in the Central 34, and even though Bainimarama led in all division, Rambuka significantly gained a good number of support. As I say, SODALPA leader Rambuka, with his unwavering commitment to improve Itaukei affairs, improve his popular among Itaukei votes. Bainimarama rockstar popularity, pool 167 Fiji Fest votes, although his tally went down by 34,250 as in the 2014 election. Let me. Some of the votes, some of the land reforms that initiated by the Fiji Fest government that may sway the vote to them. It's like the least bonus security payment. If you see in 2018, just before the election, this was published, highlighted in the dailies. The first pay, the highest payout was 700 million to all landowners engaged in the pine industry. All right, my brother. Wait. I'm sorry that I've. Lenisu and just a case, some of the specific cases. In Awaile Winbua, where the bauxite mining, 253 votes against Fiji Fest 4. Bamethodist Nailanga, where Nailanga village. This is who receive the highest payment for the pine industry. They support Fiji Fest. In Vitongo, who also gained the most the pine lease payment, they support Fiji Fest 484. In the Asawa group, SODALPA gained the most vote. There's a shift in the Asawa about supporting Fiji Fest. I think many of this is because the anti-Bainimarama, as perceived as anti-Itaukei, and also the license being imposed for small-scale tourism. And Asawa votes, Charles Saukuru gained 1,281 votes as compared to Bainimarama, who got 387 votes, and so forth. And also the SODALPA gained 73% of the total votes in Asawa, as compared to 42% in the 2014 election. All right, my conclusion is that the land issues will continue to be an important part of the election in the coming election in 2022. And there's a shift for me personally because of this general movement, this perception, and we will probably see a new government in the 2022 election. And again, the land issues will come up again. And so in terms of social cohesion, I hope with the new land reforms and so forth, people will have to accept, and the Itaukei especially, to have this mentality that land to develop, and for your own livelihood, you must develop land. And there must be a very consultative way in which land can be used to benefit all people in Fiji. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zephaniah, for even deeper insights into the volatile issues of land, politics, and elections in Fiji. And again, a huge amount of research went into that presentation. Thank you. Okay, the next speaker and the final speaker for this panel is Lurisha from CCF.
So really my sharing here is really giving an account of CCF's involvement in our account of the 2014 and the 2018 elections, and also the wider local civil society organizations. So firstly, CCF. So we're a non-governmental organization that's been around for over 20 years. We advocate and educate around our mandate, which is human rights. We also go into communities teaching them about the Bill of Rights, so really looking at their rights as per the 2013 Fiji Constitution. So we really like to empower citizens through education on good governance as well. So what this looks like in terms of civic education is when we work in communities around Fiji, we engage with them in an inclusive, participatory manner through advocacy and education on this mandate. And we assist also communities in making budget submissions that go to the national budget process. Our community engagements allow us to make substantive oral and written submissions to respective parliamentary standing committees as well. So, context of 2014, I'm sure you're aware that the 2014 Electoral Act, the decree came out then, which is now the Act, was released that really crippled the work of civil society. And if I may refer to Section 115 of the Electoral Act, it states, following the announcement of the date of the election, it shall be unlawful for any person, entity, or organization, including any person employed or engaged by any such person, entity, or organization that receives any funding or assistance from a foreign government, intergovernmental or non-governmental organization, or multilateral agency to engage in, participate in, or conduct any campaign, including organizing debates, public forums, meetings, interviews, panel discussions, or publishing any material that is related to the election or any election issue or matter. Under Section 115, subsection 2 of the Electoral Act, the duties or responsibilities assigned under the Act or the 2013 Constitution of the Republic of Fiji to the Electoral Commission or the Supervisor of Elections cannot be exercised by any other person or organization. The only exception is if authorization is given in writing by the Electoral Commission or the Supervisor. So CCF in 2014 was part of a CSO mobilization, firstly to really understand what the Electoral Act was, and really engage in a strategic discussion around, how this affects us going forward and what does this mean, how does this affect our civic education mandate. So really, civic education was rushed in 2014, meaning we're trying to get out to as many of our local communities to provide them with information. In 2014, CCF also applied for domestic observer status as per the Electoral Act by way of a letter that was sent to the minister responsible for elections and as advised by the Supervisor of Elections. But there was no response received. So materials going out to communities during the writ period as well needed to be vetted and approved prior to any dissemination. So this is really time-consuming for civil society partners, to the extent that some couldn't get out and reach their communities with civic education information. So the 2018 election context, there was a lot more strategic and allowed collaborative opportunities amongst local civil society organizations. Many of us were able to carry out civic education as early as 20 post-election period, 2014 to date, with our local communities around the electoral process. Many civil society organizations were able to do this before the writ was issued. So for example, CCF, we managed to organize and implement a public panel discussion 5 days before the writ of the 2018 elections was issued. Our engagement with these electoral management bodies, so in 2014 we found it relatively difficult to engage because there was either a lack of response, no response, or a delay, of responses forthcoming from the end of their end. So Fijian Elections Office, the minister responsible for elections. So we were part of Fijian Elections Office, put together processes that we were part of to really break down what Section 115 was, because when it was when the act came out, everyone sort of wanted to know really wanted to understand what it said. So we sought to have that space with the Fijian Elections Office. So really in 2014, there was no time to mobilize or strategize and manage official approval and accreditation in a timely fashion to carry this out with our communities. In 2018, there was some sense of ease of engagement with the Elections Office and also the multinational observer group, where we were invited to a series of consultations. Again, CSOs were invited to this roundtable where, they asked us what our opinions were, what the context was like for us, and really working under Section 115. The coalition of NGOs this time received timely advice and responses from the Fijian Elections Office, on press releases and press statements that were election related. We were able to carry out community-based conversations around electoral-related topics where we invited the Fijian Elections Office to really come and run sessions with community-based members. So I'll wrap up with two recommendations that we've been calling for, and one is to remove or review the restrictions placed on NGOs in light of Section 115. And really, the review or removal of these restrictions would assist the Elections Office in the drive to educate citizens on the electoral processes available, and election management bodies to make room for engagement with civil society organizations and support an environment where CSOs are able to carry out their legitimate activities without fear or undue hindrance, obstruction, or legal and administrative harassment. Thank you.
Okay, very informative presentation. Thank you, and well ahead of time. Thanks. Which is a first so far, and I'm partly to blame, of course. Okay, now we are in the Q&A session, and we'll follow the same format. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation. Keep your questions short and to the point, and likewise, please keep your answers short and to the point. I think we've got 15 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lely from the House of Chameleon, a transgender organization in Fiji. My question is to Mr. Zephaniah Sakai. You mentioned that probably in 2022 there'll be a new government. Could you enlighten us on what are some of your clues as to why that might be so?
Thank you. When you talk about land issues in Fiji, there are other factors. There are contributing factors attached to land. When you talk about land, you talk about the GCC. When you talk about land, you talk about the ethnicity, the Itaukei. Many of the policies or constrained by Fiji First, for instance, the Methodist Church, the termination of the scholarship, the amendments of the Itaukei Affairs Act and TLTB. All these things are contributing factors to land. As I say, land, these are contributing. And I firmly believe that apart from the land, it comes down to leadership, and also people see the type of leader and they living the experience of the current government. I think this is will be the contributing factors to my view that there will be a new government in 2022.
Rashika, I'm just curious to know, how did you work out which issues to measure the various political parties on? Right? So you enlighten me on that a little bit. The second thing is it's just a comment. One of the things that I find quite obvious in what's been happening in Fiji since independence, the trend has been a movement of voting sort of away from voting for a hierarchical system. You know, there was a time when he only thought of chiefs as being political leaders, 1970s onwards, and a movement towards the more Melanesian model, the big man, the strong man who provides security, and that's where the militarism comes in. And I find that in the more recent trends as well, that, you know, coming back of Rambuka, for instance, and the comparison with Frank Bainimarama and so on, these are Melanesian models of big man, single man. And what has worried me is a follow-up from what Father Arms was saying earlier, that the PR system, an excellent one, don't get me wrong in that. I advocated that in both 1991, 92, 93. But I'm beginning to wonder whether in Fiji, are we voting for a party or are we voting for a big man, single man? I mean, you look at the trend of votes that one person gets, and it comes from the army. And isn't that the Melanesian model we are driving ourselves into, of leadership, of power? You know, some comments by any one of you. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe I'll address a few of the points that you raised. In terms of the manifesto analysis, as I mentioned, that some of those issues are dear to me, some of those issues that I strongly advocate for, and some of those issues that have been quite polarizing. Say, for instance, West Papua. It has been quite polarizing in terms of the discussions that have been had and some of the restrictions that have been imposed by the current government in terms of West Papua advocacy. So that's why I selected that. And then other issues that are tied with environmental rights, indigenous rights, say, for instance, with the mining companies, with the extractive resource and seabed mining. And then the to be free from torture and stuff. So we've had many cases, and most of these issues get a lot of traction, for instance, on social media. One of the ways to instantly measure what's being, discussed, quite intensively within Fiji now is social media. A lot of discussions take place there because it's fast, it's free, it's accessible, it's easier. So a lot of people are having discussions over social media. And then apart from that, they also like different discussions. So I knew that land was being covered by other people, so I tried to focus on, some of the other ones that doesn't get as much coverage or talked about. So that's how I selected those issues. In terms of the strongman archetype, yes. That's what's happening within, the Melanesian region of the Pacific. And in Fiji, it's also very closely tied with the military, with the military men. So, it's hard to disassociate the both. They both operate with the same toxic masculinity. They both operate with the same sort of authority, the same sort of persona. So it's hard to differentiate the both. So in Fiji, it's nearly one and the same. And you're right, people are moving away from chiefly votes in some instances. Like, say, for instance, Rotemumu got lesser votes in 2014 compared to Rambuka in 2018. So a lot more people preferred Rambuka over Rotemumu. And that also begs us to ask in terms of, she's a high chief. And despite that, she received so less votes than Rambuka, who is not of chiefly lineage, but of military background. And then the persona he portrays, and then falling into that same strongman archetype. So yes, so definitely in the region that's prevalent. With the PR system, I think we've had a lot of discussions on the PR system. And again, the PR system is a system that is touted by a lot of experts around the world as the best in terms of being inclusive and encouraging diversity, but it has to also look at the current context it's operating in and be tweaked to, reflect that so it operates in a way which is more inclusive and diverse and egalitarian, and it doesn't become like a one-man party. But the PR system is really about the party.
Of the books to distribute. That has done. That has reference to how things are really at the ground level. That the state, the current government, may not have the confidence of Fijians in their land, in the ownership of land. Now, added to that, there's an issue about what is called the land bank, which was introduced by this government. Or decreed by this government, and that's still there. It was offered as another alternative to the track you would use through the bureaucratic Native Land Trust Board, Itoke Trust Board, whereas we have a land bank. And I lost track of that. I don't know whether that is the success of that story. What has happened to that? I don't follow that anymore. Land bill, the land bank. Thank you.
Yeah, the land bank is still there. It's still under the Land Use Act. The land bank is just like, it operates like a bank. The landowners deposit their land in consultation with the government, right? The government will sub-lease, it's a head lease, and sub-lease to potential investors. So, the case of Nawai Levu in Bua is a good case study because it depends really on the type of development. Now, for me, mining needs to be, the feasibility study, the EIA should be done thoroughly. The problem is within this Land Use Act, there is a clause that there is no redress mechanism. Within 5 years of the grace period, right, the government will look for investors. Once the grace period is gone, you don't have any redress mechanism. Now, when they try to complain about the environmental destruction, there is no avenue. There is no avenue of redress. The power also shifts from the Matangali land owners to the Director of Land and the Minister for Land. So this is the dangerous thing about the Land Use Act, and often used by the current government is that you have 60%, right? 60% to consent. Of course, what about the 40%? It is a dangerous trend, especially when activities like mining is the development. Yeah.
Okay, Chope Thorai. Yeah, there's mics coming to you. Please keep your questions to the point and same for the answers.
I'd just like to thank all the panelists for very insightful and very, very informative presentations. My question is specified towards Lucretia. I just wanted to ask about if there are any lobbying efforts already underway within the CSO sector, if you know of any, in terms of changing Section 115. And also, if there are, what does that look like? And do you think there's a role for donors to actively also, if not lobby, pressure government, or at least the responsible minister, to reconsider, as you put it, reconsider or remove or review Section 115? Nak.
Thank you. So the efforts of lobbying to review or to remove Section 115 started as early as 2014. In our direct meetings with the Fijian Elections Office or the Supervisor of Elections, this is something that we've continued to push for. CCF also is part of, we put together the Universal Periodic Review, a stakeholder, the shadow report for this, for the state, whilst the state submits their report. So these are some of the recommendations, whilst also trying to push locally. We're also trying to create that lobbying at an international level. So the efforts are still there, but we've seen no, consideration, or I mean, they've told us that they would consider, but that's about it. So there's no conversation around how this would look like or who's going to push. I mean, you heard the supervisor of elections saying today, you know, we don't create the law. We do know you don't create it, but is there an avenue where you can support or lobby for civil society actors to be involved in civic education, especially pre-election period? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jasmine, and I'm representing Oceania Pride. Roshika, thank you for highlighting the manifesto issues, and I noticed that LGBT was part of that. And during the 2014 elections, LGBT was something that was heavily talked about, but in 2018 it seemed to have watered down quite drastically. And I would like to pose a question to the panelists as well as the whole group moving forward these 2 days, that it is very important for us to have these kinds of discussions in these spaces. We cannot keep saying that because it's not a popular issue or I will lose voters, that's why I'm not going to discuss things about LGBT or disability per se. And also that we need some clarity around the electoral process in terms of people living with psychosocial disability. I remember there was a huge discussion about how people who have mental health problems should vote or shouldn't vote, because there was a huge ambiguity around the laws. And as a person with psychosocial disability, I did vote, but a lot of my colleagues I know didn't, because they thought that they would be considered of unsound mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. This is the final question.
Thank you very much. My question is to Roshika. So I saw the presentation with regards to the data that you had done on the certain issues for each political party. I'm just out of curiosity, was the study that you had done limited to that, or you may think that it could have expounded more into other areas? For example, grassroots communities would be an issue that would be of some interest. I mean, to get the view to see what each political party, how do they stand in that issue, or any other related issues that society will be facing, aside from the ones, of course, that you've done in that survey. That's my question to you, Roshika. Thank you.
Yeah. So initially I did an analysis just a couple of days before the 2018 elections. So that is an analysis based on work that I'd done just before the 2018 election. So in terms of issues affecting grassroots communities, a lot of the issues that are highlighted also affect grassroots communities. So it also affects community-based groups and organizations. I did look at a few other issues around economic policies and social policies. I don't have the analysis with me right now, but I do remember, like, say, for instance, mental health and suicide prevention. We're losing more people to suicide than we are to road accidents. However, none of the political parties had anything around that in their manifestos. So there were a lot of other things that there were like huge glaring gaps. And then, of course, the way some of the policies are framed. I do have to say that in the way the manifestos are drafted is also quite different to how other countries do it. So we are still at a stage where we're developing ways to package the manifesto in a way that is easily understandable also by the voters and also by other people like academics, policymakers, and so forth. In some countries, what they do, they have two manifestos. They have one that just highlights the main issues, and another that is a bit more comprehensive. But to do a comprehensive manifesto, you also need access to information from government, and that is not forthcoming. So some of the policies of the government also prevent people from accessing data and information from ministries and departments. And as a result, you're not able to really develop well-rounded policies because you don't have that information. So it would also be irresponsible to make specific manifesto policies if you don't have all the relevant information. So a lot of people do broadly focus on things, but I think the manifesto is still a very important document to show what the political inclinations of the political party is, and also how you can hold them accountable. You can't really hold them accountable by what they just said in a media interview or what was written in the news, because that's not part of the party structure, whereas the manifesto is, and it's a very important document, and we really need to use more of it to hold our leaders accountable.
Okay, I now close this panel discussion, which has been an excellent one. Thank you.